Michael, how you doing this week?
I'm doing great.
Good. You had a good week?
Well, yeah.
Good.
A lot better than that kid in the story last week.
Oh, yeah. You remember the story from last week?
Well, yeah, he carried fish in his pocket.
I don't think it was in his pocket, but he did have some fish, and what else?
Let's just think about that. Here I am at school, and they go, "What'd you bring for lunch?" And I go, "I got fish and bread." You know what they'd say? They'd say, "Michael, you're crazy! Crazy!"
That was probably pretty common back in Jesus' time, though.
I don't know. Was the fish like jumping around and everything? Did he eat them like all squiggly and squishy?
I don't think so. I doubt that. Okay, so we know that there was a small lunch in our lesson from last week, right? But where does that fit in? So, Jesus, in our story, was tired and ready to get away from the crowd, remember? For a while. So he got into a boat with his disciples to go to a quiet spot. And when they arrived,
it wasn't quiet.
where they thought it would be quiet, what happened?
Everybody showed up.
Yeah, there was
without food.
Well, that's right. They had
You don't
forgotten
see
to
me
bring
without food.
Yeah, they were just excited about going to hear Jesus, weren't they? And so Jesus had compassion on these people. They had come a long ways, and he began to speak to them. And soon the time passed, right? And the people looked hungry, and I imagine the disciples were getting pretty hungry too. And they were ready to eat as well. And so they suggested that Jesus send the people away to go get something to eat.
Like Pizza Hut.
No, they didn't have that. But they could go to the market or such, okay, and get something. But Jesus said, no, feed them. And they were like, well, how are we going to do that, thought the disciples. And then that's where our boy with the lunch, the 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread, right, comes in. What does Jesus do?
He made fish sandwiches.
Well, I guess you could say that. He made a whole lot of fish sandwiches for people, didn't he? Because first, he blessed the food. He asked God to bless it. And then he broke the food and broke it into pieces, right? And after he did that, what happened?
It just kept making more.
That's right. So much so that it fed 5,000 people that were there to hear Jesus. And not only that, but what else happened?
There was leftover.
Yeah, a bunch of leftovers. How many basketfuls, Michael?
Hang on. There were 12 disciples. Each one could have had a basket.
What do you
12 baskets.
12 baskets full of leftovers. Wow. And all they started out with was the 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread, didn't they?
Yeah, 1 basket.
What an exciting story. All right, so now we're going to move on to today's story, which is exciting as well. Oh, let me show you the craft that our online kids are going to do that we did last week. Doesn't that look like fun, Michael?
It looks hard.
Well, no, it really isn't that hard. We've just got some 2 different size straws, okay, that we strung onto a piece of pipe cleaner, and we have some felt on the ends that are just taped to that pipe cleaner, and then we have an eye that's glued on the front of our head.
Is that one of them googly eyes?
Yeah, those
I
are
like
fun,
that.
aren't they?
Googly eye.
Yeah, googly eyes.
Googly eye. Googly eye.
Yeah, they are fun. That is fun to say. Okay,
Googly
so
eye.
that was our craft, and what our online kids will hopefully be doing something like that. All right, our lesson begins. Night was coming, and all day the people had sat and listened to Jesus. So we're moving on from last week's story. Still, they wanted to stay. After he fed the 5,000, they wanted to make him their king. But Jesus did not seek an earthly kingship. He wanted to spend time with his Father.
He could have been king of the fish sandwich.
Well, yeah. So he told the disciples to go across the lake and he would come later. Jesus needed time to pray.
That sounds fishy.
Yeah. All right. You're silly, Michael. Okay. So we have our disciples getting into the boat to go across the lake, okay? And Jesus was going to stay because he wanted some time alone to talk to his Father. He tried to send the people home. It was difficult for some of them wanted to make him a king right then. But Jesus kindly dismissed them. Then he climbed up the mountain to be alone with God. The disciples obeyed Jesus and got into their boat and started to cross the lake. It had become quite dark. A strong wind was blowing against them and the sea was rough. We're going to put our waves out here into the water. So the waters became rough.
That's quite a wave.
Man, we've got some
Surf's
storm
up.
clouds are blowing in.
Ooh,
Maybe
lightning.
lightning. Yeah, a little lightning, a little thunder.
Boy, that just popped out of nowhere.
Yeah, it kind of does. Wearily, very tiredly, the disciples pulled on the oars. They would have had a hard time even if they had been rested. Now the journey seemed endless. They had been struggling for hours, but because of the rough waves, they had not traveled very far. Jesus knew exactly what was happening. He knew that the exhausted, tired disciples were in trouble. He would go to them. Jesus didn't have a boat, but guess what, Michael? Jesus didn't need one. He just started walking across the water. Yes, Michael, on top of the water.
That is a funny looking picture.
Swimming, he was walking on top of the water. The disciples saw him coming, but they didn't know who he was. "What's that?" gasped one of the disciples as a flash of lightning broke the darkness. Over the heaving waves, a shadowy figure was moving slowly towards them. "It's a ghost!" one of them screamed. Then a familiar voice rang out. "It is I. Don't be afraid." Peter called back, "Lord, if it is you, let me come to you on the water." Jesus replied, "Come." Peter went to the side of the boat, climbed over the edge, and began to walk on the water towards Jesus.
Oh, you got that? Oh boy.
Yeah, Peter gets out of the boat, and he too begins to walk on the water.
Lightning's hitting him on the head.
Well, that would be, well, yeah, I guess you're right. I stuck him right under it, didn't I? Okay. Peter took a few steps in perfect safety. Then he realized what he was doing. He felt the roughness of the wind, and he looked down at the swirling waves. He suddenly became afraid. He took his eyes off of Jesus. He stopped looking at him. And guess what happened, Michael?
He sunk.
He did.
Are you going to make him sink?
He began
Oh, look at him sink.
to sink into the water.
Put the lightning on his head.
Waves crashing against him. Fear gripped him. He cried out, "Save me, Jesus!" Jesus reached out and took Peter by the hand and pulled him back out of the water. Oh. We lost some waves. Let's get them waves back up there.
I like this story.
Yeah, it's exciting, isn't it, Michael? Jesus said, "Why did you doubt?" Peter felt ashamed. He had forgotten to trust Jesus. Together, they got into the boat, and at that same moment, The wind stopped blowing and the sea became calm. The storm was completely gone. Both of them climbed back into the boat, and the storm stopped. The disciples bowed before Jesus. Reverently, they said, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Aren't you glad Jesus was watching over the disciples that night? He is watching over you too. Jesus is always ready to help us. Keep trusting him. Never take your eyes off of Jesus. He will never disappoint you. So, just like Jesus knew what was happening to the disciples, Jesus knows what's happening to us too, Michael. And he cares just the same as he cared for each one of the disciples. He cares for us. And we need to talk to him. Keep in touch with him, right? Talk to him every day as much as we can, and listen to him too, because he will help us through those hard times, and he'll be with us through the good times too. Right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, boys and girls. And to end it, what is our memory verse, Michael? Do you remember?
Don't be afraid.
Yeah, don't be afraid. What else?
Only believe.
Only believe. Where's it found?
Mark
Mm-hmm.
5,
Yes.
36b.
Very good. Don't be afraid. Only believe. Mark 5:36b. Very good. What part of the story, one of our stories, was that in, Michael? Do you remember the story that was in?
The second part,
Okay.
because it's B.
Yeah, okay. But do you remember the story that was in?
Nope.
You were supposed to remember this week. So you can tell me the verse and tell me where it was found.
It's
There was
about Jesus.
Yes, it was about
Is
Jesus.
it about the girl?
Yes, it was about a girl.
The girl had died, and Jesus said, "No, she's only sleeping." And they went back, and he saved her.
He did. That's right. She was no longer passed away, was she? Jesus raised her up. So this was the story about Jairus and his daughter, right? That was dying. She was very sick. And the messengers had come while Jesus was on the road traveling to Jairus' house. Messengers came from the house to tell him that his daughter was already passed away, right?
Yep.
She had died. But Jesus turns to Jairus, the father, and he says, "Don't be afraid, only believe." So that's the part of the story that we need to remember, okay? All right, Michael. Thanks, kids.
Bye.
See you next week.